Okay, so my research is interdisciplinary, but in a much less formal sense than both Candice and Cindy. So during my undergraduate degrees, I studied arts and science. In my arts degree, I did history, and in my science degree, I did biochemistry. They don't really overlap. I've been trying to rack my brain for examples of when I've actually brought the two together to answer some sort of research question. They're pretty distinct. So, yeah, won't be talking about history for the rest of this, so back up. So in my undergrad degree in science, I studied biochemistry and molecular biology, and I actually got a bit obsessed with it and ended up doing mostly biochem subjects. In hindsight, it would have been very helpful to do some physiology, genetics, immunology. That would have helped because I really had to play catch up when it came to actually doing my PhD. Because when I did my PhD, the lab that I chose to do my PhD in was actually a much more physiology-based lab. And that's because it was, so the lab that I did my PhD in was in a not-for-profit research institute, and the focus of that institute is heart research. And obviously, if you're trying to find a cure for heart disease, it's all well and good studying little proteins, but unless you actually have the context of the whole heart, it's very hard to actually find a cure for heart disease. So in our institute, there are lots of different labs that ranged in disciplines. There were bioinformatics groups, there were molecular biology groups, there were physiology groups, but everyone essentially had the same aim, and that is to find a cure for heart disease. And so, there is a lot of crosstalk between those disciplines in my field. So, and I think, that's because, a disease is a very complex thing. So if you think about heart disease, you can think about it at a very high level. Epidemiological studies, what's the incidence of heart disease, what's the prevalence of different populations, what are the risk factors. If you go down a step, what's the effect on the organism, how does the disease manifest itself, what are the symptoms that people experience. Then if you go a step below that, which organs are it affecting. Heart disease obviously affects the heart, but it can affect other organs as well. And then below that is the cell level, so how do cells respond if you have a heart attack? Do the cells change shape or their behaviour? And then you get to the level that I'm interested in, which is the protein and DNA level. But you really can't study that in the context of heart disease without considering these other aspects. So just to give you an example, during my PhD I was interested in a protein called phosphoemultiplied 3 kinase P110 alpha, or PI3K for short, like abbreviating things. I started off doing some experiments where I was looking at the effect of this protein in cells, trying to figure out what it does. But really, because we wanted to know what the effect of this protein was in the heart, what it actually does, we really needed to look in an animal model. So we got our hands on some genetically modified mice, some of which had high levels of the protein and some of which had low levels of the protein. And by going more into the field of physiology and actually assessing heart function of those mice and dissecting the mice and measuring their heart, how much it weighs, all that sort of thing, we were able to get a feel for what the actual role of this protein was in the heart. So even though I consider myself a molecular biologist, I really have had to move into other disciplines, namely physiology, but also a little bit of genetics, a little bit of bioinformatics, a little bit of virology, to answer the research questions that I want to answer. I guess probably the most important lesson I would have is talk to other people. If you want to do some sort of technique that is not in your field, go and find someone who actually knows how to do it instead of trying to figure it out yourself. You can spend a lot of time, hours reading through papers trying to get a handle on how to do the technique or the intricacies of the technique, but it really is so much better if you can find an expert and they can bring you up to speed and you can bring them up to speed in your research, and then we can actually have a meaningful collaboration. Science really isn't done in isolation. I know a lot of people think that scientists sit in the lab and they don't talk to anyone and they just do their research, but actually it's a very, very collaborative thing where if you're not talking to people, your science will suffer. So there has to be a lot of discussion across disciplines. I think that's all I'll say for now. So,
Okay, thank you very much.